Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we will read from chapter 20. Bali surrenders the universe from Canto 8, Enchanting Pastimes, from the book Brilliant as the Sun, retelling of Srimad Bhagavatam. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langhate girim yat kripatamam vande shigrum dintarinam parmanandamatam Shri Chaitanyesham Hariyam Tatsat. Bali remained silent for some time. He owed much to Shukra, who had brought him back from the dead and by whose grace he had gained universal supremacy. Bali had served Shukra unswervingly for many years because he knew that he would achieve all good fortune by satisfying the spiritual master. How could he now disobey him? He looked across at Vaman, who had not shown the slightest disturbance as Shukra spoke. Would it be right to break his promise to such a self-controlled Brahmin? To lie or fail to honor a promise given to a Brahmin was always condemned. If the boy was Vishnu, he had more reason to keep his promise. Bali could see no justification to deny Vaman's request. The Daitya king inwardly wrangled with his dilemma. He was faced with choosing between the offense of disobeying his spiritual master or lying to a Brahmin. He needed to think clearly. Bali glanced at Shukra, who scowled back. Was his guru giving proper guidance? He had always engaged him in performing sacrifices in which Vishnu was honored. By so doing, Bali had become victorious over all his enemies and had achieved fabulous wealth. Yet now Shukra wanted him to disregard Vishnu. It seemed his guru's intention throughout was material gain. If this was Shukra's thinking, then there was no sin in rejecting him. One should never be led by a person only interested in his own gain. A genuine spiritual master must train his disciples to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Shukra had clearly lost his discrimination, so there would be no fault in disobeying him. Placing his palms together, Bali addressed Shukra. Dear Brahmin, you have told me that one should follow a religious principle only when it does not hinder one's self-interest. I accept this principle. Shukra let out a sigh of relief. Bali had seen sense. Bali took a deep breath. Over the years, he had developed much affection and respect for his spiritual master. It was not easy for him to now defy him. My dear sir, I do not think breaking my word to this Brahmin out of greed for money is in my best interest. I am the grandson of the famed King Prahlad. How can I disgrace myself and him by behaving like an ordinary cheater, especially toward a Brahmin? Shukra's face turned red. Do you think following my order would disgrace you and turn you into an ordinary cheater? He exclaimed, jumping to his feet. Bali mustered his courage. My lord, there is nothing more sinful than untruthfulness. The earth goddess once said, I can bear any heavy burden except a liar. You fool, I already explained this to you. You will not be able to fulfill your promise and descend into hell. Bali's expression was solemn. I do not fear hell, poverty, an ocean of distress, falling from a position, or even death itself as much as I fear cheating a Brahmin. Shukra shook his head in despair. You will lose everything. Bali had made up his mind. He would give Vaman anything he asked for, even if he was Vishnu. Nevertheless, he wanted to placate his spiritual master, if possible. My lord, you know better than I do that all one's wealth is lost at death. Therefore, is it not better that I try to satisfy this Brahmin with the riches that I am destined to lose? Shukra glared at Bali. Fire seemed to emanate from his eyes and nostrils. So great was his wrath. You are the only fool in human history who thinks it is noble to give away everything in charity. Bali remained calm. Dadhichi, Shibi, and many other great personalities were willing to sacrifice even their lives to benefit others. So why not give up this insignificant land? What is the objection? You are a Daitya, Bali, said Shukra in tightly constrained tones. Act like one. Do you think your great ancestors like Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu would approve of your decision? O best of the Brahmins, certainly the great deathy kings who were never reluctant to fight enjoyed this world, but in due course of time everything they had was taken away except the reputation by which they continue to exist. Therefore, one should try to achieve a good reputation only. Shukra pointed an accusatory finger at his disciple. You will be known as a loser, a fool. That will be your reputation, Bali. Bali spoke humbly. How is that possible, my dear Brahman? My heroes have gained fame by laying down their lives in battle. Rare is that hero who gets the chance to give his accumulated wealth faithfully to saintly persons. Such persons attain even greater fame. You will become poverty-stricken. If I become poor due to gambling, intoxication, or other such reasons, then I would certainly be blameworthy. Becoming poor due to giving all my possessions in charity to a saint of your caliber will enhance my reputation. Therefore, I am determined to give this little brahmachari whatever charity he asks of me. Shukra shouted in frustration, this is no ordinary brahmachari, this is Vishnu. He has come on behalf of your enemies to trick you. He will rob you of everything. Bali looked at Vaman, who silently observed the exchange between him and his guru. Then he turned to Shukra and spoke in a conciliatory tone. Great sage, saintly persons like you know full well that all rituals and sacrifices must be performed for Vishnu's pleasure. If this boy is indeed Vishnu, is that not even more reason to give him anything he asks for, regardless of whether he intends to bless or punish me? Indeed, my reputation would be greatly enhanced if Vishnu, out of fear, disguised himself as a Brahmin to beg from me under the circumstances. I will not retaliate even if he irreligiously arrests or even kills me. It makes no difference whether he is my enemy or not. Trying one last time to pacify Shukra, Bali said, if this is mighty Vishnu, he would never give up his widespread reputation. Through such deception, he would challenge me to a fair fight and either kill me or be killed by me. Tears pricked Bali's eyes as he looked affectionately at Vaman. How could he ever kill him? Vishnu could not be slain by anyone, even if they were foolish enough to try. Shukra stood with clenched fists, glowering at Bali. Unable to contain himself, he vehemently spat out a curse. Thinking yourself magnanimous and fixed in truthfulness, you dare disobey my order. You have no knowledge, yet you pose as a learned person and impudently defy me. Because of this serious transgression, you shall very soon lose everything. With these words, Shukra stormed back to his seat. Bali was visibly shaken. He owed so much to Shukra, it was deeply saddening that he had been unable to appease him. He again glanced at Vaman, who smiled. The deathy king did not regret his decision. According to custom, he washed Vaman's hands with water from his water pot before affirming his promise. Meanwhile, Bali's wife, Vindhyavali, who was seated behind the curtain, shed tears of joy. It was so wonderful to see her husband's firm devotion to Vishnu. She stepped out and told the maid servants who were coming forward with golden pot of water to give her the container. The maid servants gaped in surprise. One said to another, this is remarkable. Our lady is so chaste that she has never been seen in public. How is it that now, before everyone's vision, she wishes to assist with this brahmachari's foot bathing? Bali took the golden water pitcher from his wife and washed Vaman's feet in great jubilation. When the foot bathing was finished, he sprinkled the foot water on his head. If this was truly Vishnu, then the water could deliver the universe. Witnessing Bali's unpretentious surrender to Vishnu, the gods Vidyadhars, Siddhas, Charans, and Gandharvas loudly praised him. They all appeared in the skies above and showered him with flower petals while jubilantly chanting, all glories to the ever-truthful King Bali. The Gandharvas, Kimpurushas, and Kinnars came down, beating thousands of kettle drums and blowing trumpets. They danced and sang jubilantly. King Bali is truly an exalted soul. What a difficult task he has performed. Even though he knew Lord Vishnu was on the side of his enemies, he gave him the 3 worlds in charity. The young dwarf brahmachari began to expand his size unlimitedly. Bali looked up in astonishment. He saw that the entire universe, including the planets, outer space, seas, gods, sages, and all species of life, sat in Vaman's body. Bali murmured, "Since I have already decided to give you anything you ask for, you are free to increase your size as much as you wish." As Bali, his priest, Shukra, and everyone else present watched, Vamana manifested his universal body, replete with his 6 famous excellences. They saw that along with the different species, it also comprised the gross material elements, the senses, sense objects, mind, intelligence, and false ego, and the 3 modes of material nature. Marveling at this spectacular sight, Bali exclaimed, "Now I see that everything in the universe exists in your body. I cannot give you anything since you already possess everything. Nevertheless, just as the Ganges accepts her own water from her devotee, kindly accept my offer." Vaman endowed Bali, seated on Indra's throne, with a mystic vision by which he could see everything. Bali first saw the feet of Vishnu's universal form. On the soles he saw the lower planetary systems, such as Rasatal. On the dorsum of Vishnu's feet he saw the surface of the earth. On his calves were mountains. On his knees an array of birds, and on his thighs were the winds. On Vishnu's garments Bali saw twilight. On his private parts the Prajapatis. On his buttocks he saw himself and his chief associates. On the Lord's navel was the sky. On his waist were the 7 oceans, and on his bosom rested all the constellations. This was undoubtedly the all-powerful Lord Murari, who slew the invincible Mura Asur. On his heart he saw religion. On his chest were pleasing words and truthfulness. In his mind was the moon. On his bosom sat the goddess of fortune, holding a lotus flower. On his neck he saw the Vedas and all the syllables. On his arms the gods headed by Indra. In both his ears were the directions. On his head rested the upper planetary system. On his hair the clouds. Through his nostrils blew the raging winds. In his eyes he saw the sun, and the mouth was fire. When he spoke, his words were Vedic mantras. On his tongue Bali saw Varun, the god of water. As Bali glanced further up, he saw religious rules and prohibitions sitting on Vaman's eyebrows. When he opened his eyes, it became day, and when he blinked, it became night. On his forehead rested anger, and greed lingered on his lips. Bali sensed that the universal form's touch was the source of lusty desires, and that his semen was that of water. On his back was irreligion, and Bali saw the fire of sacrifice. When he moved or took a step, death personified stood in the Lord's shadow, and the illusory energy was in his smile. His bodily hairs were medicinal herbs, and the rivers were his veins. Stones came from his nails, and Brahma, the gods, and the sages from his intelligence. Bali could see all living entities moving and stationary throughout Vishnu's fantastic form. Bali's Asur followers saw Vaman holding the Sudarshan disc and a mighty bow. Feeling the intolerable heat generated by the disc and hearing the tumultuous sound produced by the twanging of his bow, they shook with fear. As everyone stood unmoving in the astonishment, Krishna's conch, Panchjanya, his club, Kaumodaki, his sword, Vidyadhar, his quiver, Akshay Sayaka, and his shield, decorated with many moons, all appeared in their personified forms to praise Vamana. They were accompanied by Narayan's associates from Vaikuntha like Sunanda and Nanda, and the predominating gods of the various planets. Together they glorified Vishnu, who wore a brilliant helmet, bracelets, and glittering fish-shaped earrings. He then assumed another wondrous and gigantic form. His bosom was decorated by a lock of hair which Bali knew was called Srivatsa. And the Kaustubh gem, he was dressed in yellow garments, held in place with a belt, and decorated with a flower garland surrounded by bees. In this form, he took his first step, which covered the entire surface of the earth, while his bodies and arms filled the sky and all other directions. With his second step, he covered all the higher planets, including Satyalok. There was nowhere left for him to place his third step. So this brings us to the end of chapter 20. Bali surrenders the universe. Next time we'll read from chapter 21, Bali arrested. Thank you for joining. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna.